Your tomatoes are yellowing at the edges. Your peppers are dropping fruit before they ripen. Your squash vines are collapsing midsummer. You've tried fertilizer. You've tried compost. You've tried everything the garden center recommended. Nothing worked. Here's what nobody told you. Your soil isn't sick, it's starving. Specifically, it's starving for potassium. And the fix has been sitting in your fireplace, your fire pit, your wood stove, for free this entire time. Martha Ellison is 67 years old. She lives outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, on a half-acre homestead she's worked for 19 years. For the last 4 seasons, she was spending $140 every spring on synthetic potassium fertilizer. 3 applications per season. Her peppers still yellowed, her tomatoes still split, her squash still collapsed before August. Then a neighbor told her about wood ash. She spent $3 on a bag from a local feed store, applied it once. 6 weeks later, her soil potassium levels had climbed 34%. Her peppers stopped yellowing by week 3. That same season, 112 pounds of tomatoes from 4 plants. 1 application, 1 season, 112 pounds. We're going to show you exactly how she did it, the amounts, the timing, the method, at the 8-minute mark. But before we get there, you need to understand something more important. This system didn't start in Tennessee. It didn't start in a university lab. It didn't start with any modern discovery. It was written down over 4,000 years ago, field tested across generations of farmers who had no synthetic inputs, no irrigation systems, no fertilizer aisle. They had fire, they had ash, and they had soil that kept producing. At the 4-minute mark, we'll show you the exact scripture that describes this system, not as poetry, not as metaphor, but as a literal agricultural instruction that still holds up against modern soil chemistry. At the 12-minute mark, we'll break down the cost comparison. What you're spending now versus what this system actually costs over 5 years. The numbers will surprise you. Most gardeners are feeding the plant. The biblical farmer fed the ground. That's not tradition. That's engineering. Open your Bible to Leviticus 6:12. The fire on the altar must be kept burning. It must not go out. Every morning the priest is to add firewood and arrange the burnt offering on the fire. This was not a spiritual suggestion. This was a management system. The fire never went out. That means ash was produced every single day. And in verse 13, the priests were instructed to remove that ash consistently, deliberately, on a schedule. They weren't discarding waste. They were harvesting a resource. Now look at what wood ash actually contains: potassium oxide, calcium carbonate, phosphate, trace minerals, everything a depleted soil needs to come back to life. The ancient Israelites didn't have a word for potassium, but they had a practice that delivered it to their fields with mathematical consistency. That's not coincidence. That's design. Now go back further. Genesis 3:19. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Most people read that as poetry. Farmers should read it as a mineral cycle. Carbon returns to carbon. Organic matter breaks down. Minerals re-enter the soil. Ash is simply that process accelerated by fire. What took decades of decomposition in the forest floor? Ash delivers in days. The biblical farmer wasn't waiting for leaves to rot. He was burning, collecting, and returning mineral content to the ground in its most bioavailable form. Potassium from wood ash exists as K+ ions, positively charged. They bind directly to the cation exchange sites in clay particles. No processing, no breakdown required. The root absorbs it immediately. That's the mechanism. Scripture described the practice. Physics explains why it works. 4,000 years later, the chemistry hasn't changed. Cornell University Extension analyzed wood ash from hardwood burns. The result: 3 to 7% potassium oxide by dry weight. That's roughly equivalent to half a standard dose of synthetic potassium fertilizer, from material most people throw away. But potassium isn't the only number that matters. The USDA ran soil amendment studies on wood ash application rates. At 20 pounds per 1,000 square feet, soil pH shifted from 5.5 to 6.5 in under 30 days. That single shift unlocks nutrient availability across the board. Phosphorus, magnesium, calcium. None of them move efficiently in acidic soil. Raise the pH and the soil opens up. One amendment. Multiple nutrient pathways activated. Now the archaeology, excavations across the Fertile Crescent, modern-day Israel, Jordan, and Syria, have uncovered concentrated ash deposits directly adjacent to ancient agricultural plots. These sites date to 2000 BCE and earlier. The ash wasn't scattered randomly. It was placed deliberately in rows at the base of cultivation zones. Archaeologists at Tel Aviv University identified this pattern across 14 separate dig sites. 14 sites, same system, same placement, across 4,000 years. Here's the physical mechanism behind all of it. K+ ions carry a positive charge. Soil clay particles carry a negative charge. Opposite charges attract. The potassium locks onto the clay's cation exchange sites and stays there. Stable, available, waiting for root contact. It doesn't leach out in the first rainstorm the way liquid synthetic fertilizer does. Synthetic potassium is water-soluble. It moves with water. Heavy rain comes, it's gone. Ash-derived potassium binds to the soil matrix. It stays until the root takes it. That's not a marketing claim. That's ion chemistry. University of Vermont Extension measured potassium retention in ash-amended plots versus synthetic amended plots over a 90-day trial. Ash plots retained 61% of applied potassium at day 90. Synthetic plots retained 22%. Same mineral, completely different retention rate. The biblical system wasn't less efficient than modern fertilizer. In one critical measure, it was nearly 3 times more efficient. Before you apply anything, do 2 tests right now. They take less than 5 minutes. First test, go to your garden bed, pick up a small amount of soil, drop 2 drops of white vinegar on it. If it fizzes, your soil is alkaline. Wood ash may not be what you need right now. If there's no reaction, pick up a second sample, add a pinch of baking soda, and a few drops of water. If that fizzes, your soil is acidic. That's your green light. Ash is exactly what this soil needs. Second test, walk your garden and look at your oldest leaves, the ones lowest on the plant. If the edges are yellow or brown while the center stays green, that's classic potassium deficiency. The plant pulls potassium from old tissue to feed new growth. The oldest leaves show the shortage first. 2 tests, 2 minutes. You now know more about your soil than most gardeners learn in a season. Now the installation. Source your ash first. Hardwood ash only. Oak, hickory, maple. Softwood ash from pine or cedar has lower mineral content and higher resin residue. Do not use ash from treated lumber, painted wood, or charcoal briquettes. Those contain compounds that damage soil biology. Clean hardwood ash. That's the only input. Application rate, 20 pounds per 1,000 square feet for a full bed amendment. For individual plants, use 1 cup of ash per plant. Spread it evenly across the soil surface. Work it into the top 2 to 3 inches with a rake or hand cultivator. Then water with 1 full inch of water. That inch of water does 2 things. It drives the ash particles down into the root zone, and it begins the ion exchange process, K+ releasing from the ash matrix and binding to clay particles in the soil. Cost. If you burn wood at home, your cost is 0. A 20-pound bag of wood ash from a feed store or garden supplier runs $3 to $5. Timeline from that single application, 24 hours. pH begins shifting. The calcium carbonate in the ash starts neutralizing soil acids immediately. 7 days. K+ ions are fully bound to cation exchange sites in the root zone. Root tips are making contact. 30 days. Visible recovery in foliage. Yellow edges green up. New growth comes in stronger. In Martha's case, full foliage recovery by day 38. 1 application. No reapplication needed until next season. Test your pH again at 60 days. If you're holding between 6.2 and 6.8, you're exactly where the biblical farmer wanted to be. This system works in 3 layers. Each layer does a different job. Together, they create a soil environment that sustains itself across seasons. Tier 1, subsurface mineral reservoir. Take 1 cup of ash per plant. Work it into the soil at 4 to 6 inches deep, below the surface inside the root zone. This is where primary root growth happens. You're not feeding the surface. You're placing a mineral deposit exactly where the root architecture is designed to reach. At this depth, K+ ions bind to clay particles and stay. They won't evaporate. They won't wash away in surface runoff. They sit in the root zone and wait. Within 7 days, root tips begin direct contact with the potassium deposit. Within 30 days, root density in that zone increases measurably. The plant stops spending energy searching for minerals. It starts spending that energy on fruit production, deeper mineral placement, deeper roots, stronger plants. Tier 2, surface pH shield. Take a separate, smaller amount of ash, roughly a 1/4-inch layer, and spread it across the soil surface without working it in. Leave it on top. This layer does one specific job. Every rainfall carries mild acidity. Acid rain, even in light concentrations, gradually lowers soil pH over a season. This surface ash layer intercepts that acidity before it reaches your root zone. The calcium carbonate in the ash neutralizes the acid at the surface. It also creates a minor barrier against fungal spores that thrive in acidic surface conditions. Not elimination, reduction, enough to matter over a full growing season. Reapply this surface layer every 6 to 8 weeks throughout the season. Tier 3, soil biology activation. This is the tier most gardeners never think about, and it's the one that compounds over time. Mycorrhizal fungi, the underground network that connects plant roots to surrounding mineral deposits, operate most efficiently in a pH range of 6.2 to 6.8. Below 6.0, their activity drops sharply. Below 5.5, large portions of the network go dormant. Wood ash moves soil pH into that 6.2 to 6.8 window. When pH stabilizes in that range, mycorrhizal activity increases. Research from Washington State University measured a 47% increase in mycorrhizal colonization rates in ash-amended plots compared to unamended acidic soil. 47% more fungal network. That network extends the effective reach of every root in your garden by orders of magnitude. The plant isn't just absorbing what's directly in front of its roots anymore. It's accessing a web that pulls minerals from a far wider zone of soil. Tier 1 places the minerals. Tier 2 protects the environment. Tier 3 builds the network that makes the whole system multiply. 3 layers, 1 material. Applied correctly, this system improves every season it runs. There is one watering habit that destroys everything this system builds. And most gardeners do it every single day. Shallow watering. 10 minutes with a hose, a quick pass with a sprinkler, just enough to wet the surface and call it done. It feels responsible. The soil looks dark and moist. The plant looks fine. But underneath, the root architecture is being quietly reshaped into something fragile. UC Davis conducted a root architecture study comparing 2 watering regimens. Group 1 watered shallowly, 10 minutes daily. Group 2 watered deeply, 1 full inch of water, twice per week. After 60 days, they excavated both sets of plants and measured root distribution. Group 1 roots were concentrated in the top 2 to 3 inches of soil, shallow, lateral, dense near the surface, chasing the only moisture available. Group 2 roots had penetrated 12 to 18 inches deep, vertical, structured, reaching into the mineral-rich lower soil profile. Same plant, same seed variety, same garden bed, completely different root systems, shaped entirely by where the water was placed. Here is why this matters for the ash system specifically. Your Tier 1 mineral deposit is sitting at 4 to 6 inches deep. If your roots never go below 3 inches, they never reach it. You've done the work. You've placed the minerals. But shallow watering trains the root to stay in the wrong zone. The ash system requires deep watering to function correctly. 1 inch of water, twice per week, minimum. That inch drives moisture down through the surface layer, past the shallow zone, and into the depth where your mineral deposit is waiting. The root follows the water, always. That's not preference, that's biology. Jeremiah 17:8 describes a tree planted by water, sending its roots out toward the stream. That image is not decorative. It is a description of deliberate root architecture. A plant that grows its root system toward a deep, consistent water source rather than depending on surface moisture that disappears by noon. The modern gardener trains roots upward toward the surface. The biblical model trained roots downward toward depth. One root system survives drought. One collapses the moment watering stops. Shallow watering doesn't just waste water. It builds a plant that cannot survive without constant intervention. Every time you water shallowly, You are creating dependency. You are engineering fragility into the root system of every plant in your garden. Water deep, water slow, water less often. That single change, combined with the ash system, is what separates a garden that struggles every season from one that strengthens every year. Let's put exact numbers on this. The average American gardener spending on synthetic potassium fertilizer runs $80 to $140 per season for a mid-sized garden plot. That's one season. That's not a one-time purchase. Synthetic fertilizer is consumed, leached out, and gone. You buy it again next spring, every spring. Year one, $140. Year two, $140. Year three, $140. 5 years, $700. And that's if the price doesn't rise. Synthetic fertilizer prices are tied to natural gas markets. They've increased 34% over the last 4 years. That $140 bag was $98 4 years ago. The trend does not point down. Now the ash system. If you burn wood at home, fireplace, wood stove, fire pit, your raw material cost is zero. You are already producing the input. You are throwing it away. If you don't burn wood, a 20-pound bag of clean hardwood ash runs $3 to $5 at a feed store or garden supplier. That covers 1,000 square feet of bed space for a full season. Year one, $5. Year two, $5. Year three, $5. 5 years, $25. But here's where the numbers diverge even further. Synthetic potassium is water-soluble. University of Vermont data showed only 22% retention at 90 days. The rest leaches through the soil profile and exits the root zone. You are paying for 100% of the product. Your plant accesses 22% of it. Ash-derived potassium binds to clay particles. 61% retention at 90 days. Nearly 3 times the staying power of the synthetic alternative, which means the effective cost gap isn't $140 versus $5. It's worse than that. When you account for retention rates, you need roughly 3 synthetic applications to deliver what one ash application delivers in bioavailable potassium over a full season. 3 applications at $140 each, $420 per season for equivalent mineral delivery. 1 ash application, $5. There's one more number worth stating. Synthetic fertilizer, applied repeatedly over years, increases soil salt concentration. University of California Agriculture Studies found that long-term synthetic potassium application raised soil electrical conductivity by an average of 0.8 DSEM over 5 years. At elevated salinity levels, soil microbial populations decline, mycorrhizal networks contract. The soil becomes increasingly dependent on external inputs to function. You spend more. The soil performs less. You spend more again. Wood ash does the opposite. It lowers acidity. It feeds soil biology. It builds the mycorrhizal network. Each season the system runs, the soil becomes slightly more capable, not slightly more dependent. 5 years of synthetic fertilizer. Degraded soil, $700 spent, increasing input requirement. 5 years of wood ash, improved soil biology, $25 spent, decreasing input requirement. The biblical farmer had no choice but to work with what the land and the fire produced. That constraint turned out to be an advantage that took modern agriculture 4,000 years to rediscover. Proverbs 12:11. Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. The biblical farmer didn't chase the newest input. He didn't wait for the next product at the garden center. He read his land. He worked with what fire and soil and water produced, and he fed his family from the same ground, season after season, for generations. That's not primitive. That's mastery. What we've built over the last century is a gardening culture that treats soil as a delivery medium, something to hold roots in place while we pour purchased nutrients over it. The soil itself becomes irrelevant. The inputs become everything. And every season, you pay again for what the soil used to provide on its own. Wood ash breaks that cycle, not because it's cheap, not because it's ancient, because it works with the actual chemistry of soil, the ion exchange, the pH window, the fungal networks, in a way that synthetic inputs were never designed to do. Synthetic fertilizer was designed to be sold annually. Wood ash was designed, by the nature of fire itself, to return to the ground it came from. $3, one application, 30 days. That's all Martha needed to recover 4 seasons of declining yields. 112 pounds of tomatoes from 4 plants. A soil potassium level that climbed 34% without a single bag of synthetic fertilizer. She didn't discover something new. She recovered something old. If this is the first time you're hearing about the biblical approach to soil, there's more where this came from. We cover deep watering systems, ancient composting methods, and seed selection principles that have been field tested across thousands of years, all on this channel. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and drop a comment below. Tell us what soil type you're working with. Clay, sandy, loamy, compacted, whatever it is, type it below. We read every one, and it helps us build the next video around what you're actually dealing with in your garden. If you know someone spending $100 a season on potassium fertilizer, send them this video. One share might save them years of frustration and hundreds of dollars. The ground is waiting. Give it what it was always meant to receive.